You know, dear, when I called my daughter to ask when her wedding would be, she just said to me, "We already got married, Grandma. We only invited people who really matter. Just send us the keys to the cabin and stop making such a fuss." Well, I just smiled and hung up that phone. 3 days later, I left a wedding gift at their doorstep that made her new husband scream like he'd seen a ghost. If you're listening to this old story of mine, you'll understand why sometimes the best gifts are the ones that reveal the truth. Let me tell you how this whole mess started, because it didn't begin with that phone call. No, it started 2 years back when my granddaughter Emma brought home this fellow named Blake for the first time. I'm Dorothy, 70 years old now, and up until 3 days ago, I thought I knew my Emma through and through. We used to talk every single day. You see, she'd call me during her lunch hour, and we'd chat about everything under the sun. Her job at the marketing firm, the shows she was watching, all her dating troubles. When she met Blake, well, I was truly happy for her. That girl deserved someone who could see how bright and kind she was. "Grandma, he's different," she told me that first evening, just glowing like a firefly. "He really understands me." I had made my special pot roast, the one Emma had been asking for since she was 12 years old. Blake showed up in a fancy suit, carrying flowers and saying such nice things about my little house. He was handsome in that smooth way that usually made my skin crawl. But Emma was so happy that I pushed those feelings down deep. During dinner he asked me all sorts of questions about my years as a school teacher, and seemed to hang on every word I said. He praised my cooking, helped clear the dishes, even offered to wash them. Perfect gentleman behavior that felt, well, it felt like he was putting on a show. "Your grandmother raised such a wonderful girl," he said when he hugged me goodbye. "You must be so proud of her." I was proud, of course. Emma had built herself a good career, owned her own little apartment, never needed to depend on anyone for anything. She was strong and independent, everything I'd hoped she'd become. But something about that night bothered me. Maybe it was how he talked about Emma like she was some prize he'd won, or how he mentioned my little cabin up in the mountains 3 times during dinner. I owned a small place up in the Rockies that had been in our family for 20 years, where Emma and I spent every summer together making memories. "He's very interested in our family traditions," I told my sister Ruth the next day. "That's sweet, Dorothy. It means he wants to belong," Ruth said. I wanted to believe that, I really did. But something about Blake's perfect smile reminded me of Emma's grandfather, my late husband Henry. Henry had that same charm, that same way of making you feel special right up until he decided you weren't useful to him anymore. Over the next few months, I watched Blake slowly work his way into every corner of Emma's life. He had opinions about her friends, her work, even about me. Our daily phone calls became weekly, then monthly, then hardly at all. "Blake thinks I should focus more on our relationship," Emma explained when I asked why she seemed so distant. "He says couples who really love each other put each other first." That should have been my first warning sign. But I told myself I was just being an overprotective grandmother. Emma was 28, old enough to make her own choices. If she was happy, I should be happy for her. But then came the engagement party that I wasn't invited to. I found out about Emma's engagement the same way strangers did, through Facebook. There was a picture of her hand with a big diamond ring, and the words, "He asked." I said yes, "Can't wait to start forever together." 53 likes and counting. Comments from friends and coworkers congratulating her, not one of them wondering where her grandmother was, because they probably thought I already knew. I stared at that picture for 10 whole minutes, my coffee getting cold as I tried to understand what I was seeing. My granddaughter was engaged and I had to learn about it from the computer. I called her right away. "Oh my goodness, Grandma, I'm so sorry." Emma's voice was all breathless and excited. "It just happened last night, and we got so caught up in the moment. Blake surprised me at our favorite restaurant, and then we went back to his place and called his parents first. It got so late, and I was going to call you this morning, I promise." "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound warm. "Tell me everything about it." And she did. For 20 minutes she gushed about the proposal, the ring, how romantic it all was, how Blake's parents were already planning an engagement party at their country club, how they were thinking about a spring wedding. "When's the engagement party?" I asked. There was a pause. "Next Saturday." It's going to be small, just close family and a few friends. Should I plan to drive down Friday night? Another pause. Longer this time. Grandma? About that, Blake's family has very particular ideas about these events. His mother is quite traditional, and she's planned everything according to their way of doing things. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What does that mean, Emma? It means, well, it's really just for Blake's side of the family and a few of our couple friends. It's not that you're not important, it's just that they have this way of doing things, and Blake thinks it's better if we respect that. Blake thinks. Everything had become about what Blake thinks. I see. I kept my voice steady. And what do you think? I think Blake knows his family better than I do, and I want to start things off right with them. You understand, don't you? We'll do something special, just the three of us. Soon. That was 6 months ago. We never did do anything special, just the three of us. In fact, I'd only seen Blake twice since then, and both times he was polite but distant, like I was some elderly aunt he had to put up with instead of the grandmother who'd raised Emma alone after her parents died in that car accident, when she was 10. The wedding planning happened around me, not with me. Emma would mention bits and pieces. They'd found a place, hired a photographer, picked out flowers, but when I offered to help or asked about details, I got vague answers about how Blake was handling most of it, or his mother had connection. 3 months ago, I asked about the date so I could request time off from my part-time job at the local bookstore. We're thinking early October, Emma said, probably the second weekend. Blake's looking at venues. That sounds lovely. October in Colorado is beautiful. Are you thinking of having it at the cabin? I could clean it up real nice. Oh no, Grandma. Blake wants something more elegant, more sophisticated than a backyard mountain wedding. The dismissal hurt more than I expected. Emma had always loved our cabin. As a little girl, she'd declared she wanted to get married there someday, barefoot on the deck with lights strung through the pine trees. Of course, I said, whatever makes you happy, but I wasn't invited to look at venues. I wasn't asked about the guest list. I wasn't included in the dress shopping trips that Emma posted about online, with Blake's mother beaming beside her in every picture. I was becoming a stranger in my own granddaughter's life. The final blow came exactly 2 weeks ago. Emma called while I was sorting through old photo albums, a quiet Tuesday evening task that would forever be marked in my memory as the moment everything changed. Grandma, I need to talk to you about something and I need you to stay calm about it. Nothing good ever followed those words, but I took a deep breath and sat down in my favorite chair. What is it, sweetheart? Blake's been reading about family relationships and healthy boundaries in marriage. He thinks it's really important that we establish our independence as a couple from the very beginning. I felt that familiar chill. What kind of independence? Well, he pointed out that I've been depending on you emotionally for most of my life, like calling you when I'm upset instead of working through things with my partner. He thinks that might cause problems in our marriage. Emma, talking to your grandmother when you're upset isn't unhealthy. It's normal. But is it? Blake showed me some articles about women who put their grandmothers before their husbands, and how that destroys marriages. I don't want to be that kind of wife, Grandma. I closed my eyes, recognizing the manipulation for exactly what it was. Blake was cutting Emma off from her support system, and he was making her believe it was for her own good. What does this mean practically? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. It means we need to set some boundaries, less frequent contact, more space for Blake and me to build our own traditions. She hesitated. Blake thinks it would be healthier if we spent the holidays with his family this year, just to break the pattern of dependence. The holidays. We'd spent every Christmas together since her parents died. It was our tradition, our time. Emma would drive up from Denver on Christmas Eve, and we'd stay in our pajamas until noon, drinking hot chocolate and opening presents like she was still 12 years old. I see. My voice sounded strange. Distant. Anything else? Actually, yes. Blake thinks the cabin situation is complicated. What about the cabin? Well, I've always assumed I'd inherit it someday. But Blake pointed out that puts pressure on our relationship, like he feels like he can never truly relax there because it's not really ours. It's yours. And if something happened between us and you, we'd lose our vacation spot. I gripped the phone tighter. Are you asking me to sign the cabin over to you? Not exactly. Blake thinks it would be better if we just found our own place, somewhere that's truly ours. He doesn't want to feel like he's constantly being watched by you when we're supposed to be relaxing. Being watched by me, the woman who'd barely seen him in the past year. Emma, that cabin has been in our family for 20 years. It's where you learn to fish, where we've made thousands of memories together. I know, Grandma, and I treasure those memories. But I'm starting a new family now, with Blake, and he needs to feel like we have our own special places. Our own special places, places that didn't include me. I ended that conversation with promises to think about everything and respect their need for space. But inside, I was already making plans. Not for revenge, not yet. But I was going to find out exactly who Blake really was and what he wanted from my granddaughter. It took me exactly 1 week of careful internet searches and a few phone calls to Emma's college friends to piece together Blake's pattern. Emma wasn't his first wealthy, trusting girlfriend. There was Jessica, whose family owned a successful chain of restaurants. She'd also been isolated from her family before their wedding was called off when her father discovered Blake's gambling debt. And before Jessica, there was Amanda, whose trust fund Blake had tried to access before her brothers stepped in. Blake Richardson wasn't just controlling, he was a predator who specialized in smart, successful women with family money. And Emma, with her good career and expectation of inheriting valuable mountain property, was his latest target. That's when I started planning my wedding gift. The phone call that changed everything came 3 days ago on a Wednesday morning while I was watering my garden. Emma's name appeared on my phone, and for a split second I felt that old surge of joy before remembering how things stood between us now. "Hi, Grandma." Her voice was different, flat and mechanical. "Hello, sweetheart. How are you? I'm calling to let you know that Blake and I got married yesterday. It was a small ceremony, just immediate family and our closest friends." I stopped breathing. "Yesterday? But I thought you were having a wedding in October." "We decided to do something more intimate." Blake felt like a big wedding was too much pressure, too commercial. "We found a beautiful venue in Aspen and kept it simple. Simple and secret, apparently." "Congratulations," I managed. "I'm sure it was beautiful. It was perfect, really." Blake's parents were there and his sister flew in from California. My friend Sarah was my maid of honor and Blake's best friend Tom was his best man. The photographer got some amazing shots. She was listing off details like she was reading from a catalog, not describing the happiest day of her life. But what struck me most was what she wasn't saying. "That sounds lovely, Emma. I'm happy for you. Thanks. Oh, and Grandma, Blake and I were wondering if you could send us the keys to the cabin. We're thinking of spending our honeymoon there since we didn't have time to plan a proper trip." There it was, the real reason for the call. Not to share her joy with her grandmother, not to include me in this major life moment, but to ask for the keys to property they'd already decided should be theirs. "The keys to the cabin," I repeated slowly. "Right, Blake's really excited to see it. I've told him so much about it over the years. He's particularly interested in the renovations you've done and the property value." "Property value? How romantic." "Emma, when you say you got married yesterday, do you mean you had a ceremony or do you mean you're legally married?" "Both. We got the license last week and had the ceremony yesterday." "Why?" "Just making sure I understand." "And you didn't think to invite your grandmother to your wedding?" There was a pause. "Grandma, please don't make this dramatic." It was Blake's decision to keep it small, and honestly, after everything we talked about regarding boundaries, I thought you'd understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that my granddaughter had married a man who had convinced her that excluding her own grandmother from her wedding was healthy. I understood that Blake had succeeded in his plan to isolate Emma from the one person who might have protected her from him. "So you'll send the key?" "We're hoping to drive up this Friday." "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make sure you get them." After I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time staring at my flowers and thinking about patterns. Blake followed pattern. He isolated women from their families, convinced them to give him access to their money, and then probably moved on when he'd gotten what he wanted or when someone started asking too many questions. But Blake had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was just another helpless grandmother who would quietly accept being cut out of her granddaughter's life. He'd underestimated what happens when you back a woman into a corner and take away the thing she loves most in the world. I spent the rest of that day making phone calls and sending emails. By evening, I had everything I needed to give Blake exactly what he deserved. Not revenge, really, justice. The wedding gift I was planning would be far more valuable than anything Emma might find on her registry. It would be the gift of truth. I've always believed that the best gifts are the ones that keep on giving, so when I drove to Emma and Blake's apartment that Friday morning, I made sure my wedding present would provide lasting memories. The package was beautifully wrapped in silver paper with an elegant white bow. Inside was a leather folder containing several items that I'd spent the past 72 hours carefully putting together. Blake was going to love learning about his new family connection. I left it outside their door with a note. Congratulations on your marriage. Every new husband should know about his wife's family history. With love, Dorothy. Then I went home and waited. The call came at 2:17 in the afternoon. Emma's number but Blake's voice, and he was screaming, "What the hell is wrong with you? You crazy old woman. How dare you send us this garbage?" I set down my teacup gently. "Hello, Blake. I take it you opened your wedding gift. This isn't funny. This is harassment. I'm calling the police. I'm confused, dear. What exactly would you report? That your grandmother-in-law gave you a wedding gift containing public records and newspaper articles." In the background, I could hear Emma crying. "Blake, calm down. Let me talk to her." "No, this woman is insane. She's trying to ruin our marriage before it even starts." I couldn't help but smile. "Blake, surely you're not upset about me sharing some interesting family history. I thought you'd appreciate knowing about the connections between our families." The truth was, I discovered something absolutely fascinating during my research into Blake's background. It turns out that Blake's grandfather, William Richardson, had been involved in a rather significant business dealing with my late husband Henry back in a real estate development deal that had gone very, very badly. The documents I'd included in the wedding gift told the complete story, how William Richardson and Henry had been partners in a shopping mall development project, how Richardson had systematically stolen funds from their joint accounts, how Henry had lost nearly everything, including his first marriage, because of Richardson's theft, how Richardson had fled to Florida with over $2 million, leaving Henry bankrupt and facing lawsuits from investors. But that wasn't the most interesting part. The most interesting part was what I'd discovered in the final newspaper article. William Richardson had died in a car accident, but not before confessing on his deathbed to his grandson Blake about the money he'd stolen and hidden in various accounts. Money that Blake had been quietly accessing for years. Money that had funded his lifestyle, his expensive clothes, his ability to court women like Emma without holding down a real job. Money that legally belonged to Henry's estate, which since Henry had died 3 years ago, now belonged to his only heir. "Blake," I said calmly into the phone. I also included some contact information for the law firm that handled Henry's estate. "They're very interested in speaking with you about those offshore accounts your grandfather mentioned in his confession. Apparently there's quite a bit of money that rightfully belongs to Emma." The screaming stopped abruptly. "You're lying," he said, but his voice had changed. The rage was gone, replaced by something that sounded distinctly like panic. "I never lie, dear. I'm a retired school teacher. We're trained to be very precise about facts, but don't take my word for it. I'm sure your grandfather's lawyer in Miami will remember you. Mr. Rodriguez has been very helpful in tracking down the paper trail." I heard Emma in the background asking what was happening, what money I was talking about. "Oh, and Blake, the cabin keys are in the folder too. Consider it my wedding gift to both of you. I'm sure you'll find it very relaxing to discuss your family's financial history while enjoying the mountain views." Then I hung up and poured myself another cup of tea. The next few hours were going to be very interesting indeed. Emma called me at 6:30 that evening. Her voice was hoarse from crying, and I could hear Blake shouting in the background. "Grandma, what did you do?" I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset and feeling more peaceful than I had in months. "I gave you both a wedding gift, sweetheart. Did you read through everything?" "I read enough. Blake says it's all lies, that you're trying to break us up." "What do you think, Emma?" There was a long pause. I think I need you to explain some things. Blake's grandfather really stole money from Grandpa Henry. $2.3 million according to the bank records. Your grandfather spent years trying to recover it, but William Richardson disappeared. The stress of it contributed to your grandfather's first marriage ending and his financial ruin." Another pause. And Blake knew about this money. I could hear Blake's voice getting closer to the phone, his words muffled but clearly furious. The deathbed confession suggests he did. Yes, the private investigator I hired found records of Blake accessing several of those accounts over the past 5 years. He's been living off money that legally belonged to your grandfather's estate. That's impossible. Blake has a consulting business. He told me he specializes in investment strategies for wealthy clients. My heart broke a little for her. Emma, when's the last time you saw Blake actually work? When's the last time he had a client meeting, or took a business call, or showed you a contract? Silence. In the background I could hear Blake demanding that Emma hang up the phone. The law firm wants to meet with you, sweetheart. As Henry's heir, you have a legal claim to that money plus interest. They estimate it's worth nearly $4 million now. $4 million? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Blake married you 3 days after I hired the private investigator. The timing seems rather coincidental. Don't you think? Now I could hear Blake clearly. He was telling Emma that I was lying, that I was jealous of their happiness, that I was trying to destroy their marriage because I couldn't stand to see her happy. Emma, I said gently, ask yourself this. If none of this is true, why is Blake so upset? If his grandfather was innocent, wouldn't he want to clear his family's name? Wouldn't he be curious about getting justice for what happened to your grandfather? The line went quiet, except for the sound of Emma breathing. There's something else, I continued. The private investigator also found records of 2 previous engagements, Jessica Chen, in 2019, and Amanda Walsh in 2020. Both engagements ended when their families discovered Blake's financial deception. Both women had family money. Both were isolated from their support systems before the truth came out. Stop, Emma whispered. I have their contact information if you'd like to speak with them. I said stop. The line went dead. I set the phone down and looked out at the darkening sky. Tomorrow, Emma would have to decide what to believe. Tomorrow, she would have to choose between the man who had isolated her from everyone who loved her, and the truth that could set her free. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Blake Richardson was going to sleep knowing that his carefully constructed house of lies was crumbling around him. And I was going to sleep better than I had in months, knowing that my granddaughter finally had all the information she needed to make the right choice. The gift that keeps on giving. Indeed. Emma didn't call back that night or the next day, but on Sunday morning, I found her sitting on my front porch steps, still wearing the same clothes from Friday. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair unwashed, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Tell me everything, she said without even saying hello. I made coffee and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd done homework as a child, where we'd planned her college applications, where we'd shared 1,000 conversations about everything and nothing. Now we were going to talk about how the man she'd married was a fraud. Blake left yesterday, she said, staring into her coffee cup. Packed 2 suitcases and said he needed time to think. He told me you were poisoning our marriage with lies and that if I believed you over him, then maybe we weren't meant to be together. Classic manipulation. Give the victim an ultimatum that makes them feel responsible for the relationship's failure. Where did he go? I don't know. He turned off his phone. But Grandma, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I found something. Emma pulled out a manila folder from her purse. After Blake left, I went through his things. His laptop, his desk, everything. I found these. She spread out printed emails across my kitchen table. They were correspondence between Blake and someone named Marcus Webb, discussing the Richardson inheritance and maintaining access to offshore accounts. The dates went back 2 years, long before Blake had even met Emma. There's more, Emma said, her voice getting stronger. I called Jessica Chen yesterday, the woman from your private investigator's report. I raised an eyebrow. What did she tell you? Everything. How Blake isolated her from her family, convinced her to put him on her bank accounts, even had her write a will leaving everything to him. Her father hired a detective and discovered Blake's pattern. When they confronted him, he disappeared overnight. Emma pulled out her phone and showed me a text message thread. Jessica put me in touch with Amanda Walsh too. Same story, Grandma. Exact same pattern. He finds successful women with family money, charms them, isolates them from their support systems, and then gains access to their assets. I reached across and squeezed her hand. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Don't apologize. You tried to warn me and I chose not to listen. I chose to believe a man I'd known for 2 years over the grandmother who raised me. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Jessica told me something else. She said Blake actually researched us before he even accidentally met me at that coffee shop. He knew about the cabin, knew about Grandpa Henry's financial troubles, knew about you being widowed. The coffee shop meeting. Emma had always thought it was fate that she'd literally bumped into Blake, spilling coffee on his expensive shirt, leading to their first conversation. Turns out fate had nothing to do with it. What are you going to do? I asked. Emma looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was 12 years old and had decided to stand up to a bully at school. Determined, fierce, ready for a fight. I'm going to destroy him, she said simply. But I'm going to need your help. For the first time in 2 years, my granddaughter was asking for my help instead of pushing me away. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I smiled with genuine happiness. Tell me what you need. The plan we developed was beautifully simple. Blake would come back eventually. Men like him always do when they think the crisis has passed. He'd apologize, promise to change, maybe even claim he'd been confused or overwhelmed by the accusations. He'd try to smooth things over and get back to his original plan of accessing Emma's assets. But when he came back, we'd be ready for him. Emma called the law firm that Monday and met with Henry's estate attorney, Patricia Winters. The news was even better than I'd hoped. Not only did Emma have a legal claim to the money Blake's grandfather had stolen, but because Blake had been accessing those accounts while knowing they contained stolen funds, he could be charged with criminal conspiracy and money laundering. The statute of limitations on the original theft has expired, Patricia explained to Emma over the phone, but your husband's recent access to those accounts resets the legal clock. He's essentially been receiving stolen property for years. Patricia also connected Emma with a federal investigator who specialized in financial fraud. Agent Jennifer Liu had been tracking Blake's pattern for months, building a case based on complaints from Jessica and Amanda's families. We've been waiting for the right opportunity to move forward, Agent Liu told us during a conference call. Your situation provides the final pieces we need. If you're willing to cooperate, we can set up a controlled operation. Emma agreed immediately. She wanted Blake held accountable, not just for what he'd done to her, but for what he'd done to Jessica and Amanda, and who knows how many other women. Wednesday afternoon, Blake texted Emma. Can we talk? I miss you. I'm ready to come home. Emma showed me the message. Should I respond? Tell him you miss him too, and that you're sorry for doubting him. Tell him you realize I was just jealous and trying to cause trouble. She typed the message, her jaw clenched with anger, but her words perfectly crafted to appeal to Blake's ego. He responded within minutes, saying he'd be home by Friday evening and that they could start fresh. Agent Liu briefed us Thursday morning. The apartment will be monitored. Emma, you'll be wearing a wire and we'll have agents positioned nearby. All you need to do is get him to admit he knew about the stolen money and that he married you to gain access to your inheritance. What if he doesn't confess? Emma asked. Then we proceed with the financial evidence we already have, but a recorded confession would strengthen the case significantly and help us pursue charges related to his other victims. Friday evening came faster than I expected. I sat in my living room, supposedly reading a book, but actually staring at my phone, waiting for updates. Agent Liu had given me a number to call if Emma needed help, though they assured me the apartment was completely secure. At 7:43 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. He's here. At 8:15 p.m., he brought flowers and wine, playing the perfect apologetic husband. At 8:52 p.m., he's talking about planning a real honeymoon, asking about accessing my savings account for deposit. At 9:31 p.m., got him to admit he knew about the offshore accounts. FBI moving in now. I set down my phone and poured myself a glass of wine. Blake Richardson's predatory career was officially over, but somehow I suspected the most satisfying part was still to come. The local news picked up the story by Monday morning. Local man arrested in multi-state financial fraud scheme was the headline in the Denver Post. They didn't mention Emma by name, referring to her only as the most recent victim. but Blake's mugshot was prominently displayed. He looked exactly like what he was, a common criminal whose charm had finally run out. Emma came over for lunch that day, bringing Chinese takeout and looking lighter than she had in months. "Agent Liu called this morning," she said, unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken. "Blake's been formally charged with conspiracy, money laundering and fraud across multiple states. His bail was set at $500,000. I nearly choked on my tea. $500,000. Apparently he's considered a flight risk since he has access to offshore accounts and a history of disappearing when confronted. His parents can't afford the bail and his accounts have been frozen pending investigation." We ate our lunch in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Emma spoke again. "Grandma, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest." I set down my chopsticks. "What is it? How long did you know? How long did you know about Blake's pattern? About what he was really after?" I considered lying or softening the truth, but Emma deserved honesty. "I suspected something was wrong from the beginning, but I didn't have proof until about 3 months ago. That's when I hired the private investigator." 3 months ago, Emma nodded slowly. "Right around the time I told you about the boundaries conversation." "Yes, and you didn't try to warn me directly because you knew I wouldn't believe you." I met her eyes. "Would you have?" She shook her head. "No, I would have thought you were jealous or trying to interfere. Blake had me so convinced that you were the problem." She paused, playing with her noodles. "How did you know to look into his grandfather's background?" "I recognized the name Richardson from your grandfather's old papers. When I realized the connection, I knew there had to be more to the story." Emma was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and sad. "I was so mean to you, Grandma. I said terrible things. I excluded you from my own wedding because he convinced me it was healthy." "Emma, no, let me finish. I chose a man I'd known for 2 years over the grandmother who sacrificed everything to raise me alone. I believed his version of what family should look like instead of trusting my own experience. I'm so ashamed." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You were manipulated by an expert predator. That's not your fault. But I should have seen through him. I'm smart, educated, successful. How did I fall for it? Because he targeted those exact qualities. He found a strong, independent woman and convinced her that her strength was actually weakness. That's what predators do, sweetheart. They don't target weak people, they target people who have something they want." Emma squeezed my hand. "How do I make this right between us? You already have. You're here, you're safe and you're free. That's all I ever wanted." We finished our lunch and spent the afternoon looking through old photo albums, Emma pointing out pictures from cabin summers and asking me to tell her stories she'd forgotten. It felt like we were rebuilding something that had been broken, brick by brick. That evening, as Emma was getting ready to leave, she paused at the door. "Grandma, there's going to be a civil trial. Agent Liu says the families of Blake's other victims are filing a class action lawsuit to recover their losses. They want me to be part of it. Are you going to join them?" Emma smiled, and for the first time in 2 years it was the fierce, determined smile I remembered from her childhood. "Oh, absolutely. I'm going to make sure Blake Richardson never has the opportunity to hurt another woman again. That's my girl," I thought. Welcome back. The trial began 6 weeks later, and it was everything I could have hoped for. Patricia Winters had been right about the money. Emma was entitled to nearly $4 million in recovered assets, plus interest and damages. But more importantly, the prosecution had built an airtight case against Blake that exposed his entire operation. Jessica Chen flew in from Seattle to testify, looking confident and professional in a navy blue suit. Amanda Walsh drove up from New York, clearly nervous but determined to see justice done. Together with Emma, they painted a picture of a systematic predator who had refined his technique over years of practice. I sat in the gallery every day, watching my granddaughter tell her story with dignity and strength. She testified about the isolation, the manipulation, the way Blake had convinced her to doubt her own instincts and cut ties with her family. She spoke calmly and clearly, never breaking down, never letting emotion overwhelm her facts. Blake's defense attorney tried to portray him as a misguided young man who had made poor choices but wasn't a criminal mastermind. That strategy fell apart when Agent Liu presented evidence of Blake's detailed research into each of his victims, including surveillance photos of Emma taken weeks before their accidental meeting. But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. On the third day of the trial, the prosecution called Marcus Webb, the man who had been corresponding with Blake about the offshore accounts. Webb had been arrested as an accomplice and had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Miss Richardson contacted me in 2018, Webb testified, asking for help accessing accounts his grandfather had established before his death. When I explained the legal complexities, he told me he was working on a long-term plan to legitimize his access to the funds. What did he mean by long-term plan? The prosecutor asked. He said he was going to marry someone with a legal claim to the money. He showed me newspaper articles about Henry Thompson's financial losses and explained that Thompson's heir would be the rightful owner of the stolen fund. He said once he gained access to that person's finances through marriage, he could claim the offshore money as community property. Emma turned pale at this testimony. The prosecutor continued questioning Webb. Did Mr. Richardson discuss specific targets for this plan? Yes. He had identified 3 potential candidates based on their family financial histories and personal circumstances. He showed me social media profiles and explained why each woman would be vulnerable to his approach. Was one of those women Emma Thompson? Yes. He said she was the ideal target because she was successful but emotionally isolated after her parents' death, close to her grandmother who owned valuable property, and naive about relationships due to limited dating experience. I watched Emma's face as she heard herself described as a target, a mark to be exploited. The pain in her eyes was terrible, but beneath it I saw something else. Rage, pure, focused rage at the man who had studied her vulnerabilities like a predator studies prey. Blake's attorney objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. The jury now understood that Blake hadn't simply been accessing stolen money. He had orchestrated an elaborate multi-year plan to manipulate Emma into marriage, so he could legally claim assets that belonged to her family. When Webb finished his testimony, Blake looked smaller somehow, hunched in his chair like the pathetic criminal he'd always been beneath the expensive clothes and practiced charm. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The words echoed through the courtroom as Blake Richardson's carefully constructed world collapsed around him. Conspiracy, money laundering, fraud, and a new charge the prosecutor had added based on Webb's testimony: criminal marriage fraud, with intent to commit grand larceny. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling over $8 million including interest and damages. Since Blake had already spent most of the money he'd stolen, this meant he would emerge from prison as broke as his victims had been when he'd finished with them. Emma testified during the sentencing hearing, delivering a victim impact statement that left half the courtroom in tears. Blake Richardson didn't just steal money from me, she said, looking directly at him as he sat shackled at the defendant's table. He stole 2 years of my life, my relationship with my grandmother, my ability to trust my own judgment, and my faith in love itself. He convinced me that the people who truly cared about me were the enemy while he was systematically planning to rob me blind. She paused, gathering herself, then continued with steel in her voice. But here's what Blake didn't understand about the women he targeted. We're not weak. We're not victims waiting to happen. We're strong, intelligent women who were temporarily deceived by an expert liar. And when we discovered the truth, we didn't just walk away. We fought back together. Blake kept his eyes down during Emma's statement, but I saw his shoulders shake when she said, I hope you spend every day of your sentence thinking about the lives you destroyed and the women who were strong enough to rebuild them. After the sentencing, we gathered outside the courthouse. Emma, Jessica, Amanda, Agent Lou and me. The media wanted interviews, but we politely declined. This wasn't about publicity or revenge. It was about justice. Jessica hugged Emma goodbye. Thank you for being brave enough to wear that wire. Without your recording, we might never have gotten a conviction. Amanda squeezed my hand. Thank you for not giving up on your granddaughter. If you hadn't investigated Blake's background, he'd still be out there finding new victims. Agent Lou gave us all her card. You've helped us shut down a predator who might have hurt dozens more women. The FBI appreciates your cooperation, but more importantly, you should be proud of your courage. As the crowd dispersed, Emma and I walked to our cars in comfortable silence. Finally, she turned to me. Grandma, I have something to ask you. What is it, sweetheart? She smiled. That beautiful smile I'd missed for 2 years. Would you help me plan a real wedding? Someday when I find someone who actually deserves me, someone who loves you too, because anyone who can't appreciate my grandmother isn't worthy of me. I felt tears sting my eyes. I would be honored. And Grandma, about the cabin. I know Blake made me say those awful things about it not being sophisticated enough. The truth is, I've always dreamed of getting married there, barefoot on the deck, with lights strung through the pine trees, just like I used to plan when I was little. It would be perfect, I said, hugging her tight. As we drove away from the courthouse, I thought about the woman I'd raised. Emma had been temporarily lost, deceived by a master manipulator, who had targeted her kindness and turned it against her. But in the end, the strength I'd seen in her as a child had resurfaced. She'd found her way back to herself and back to me. Blake Richardson had made one fatal error in his calculations. He'd assumed that isolating Emma from her family would make her vulnerable and dependent. Instead, it had only made our eventual reunion stronger, and our combined fury more devastating than he could have imagined. The predator had become the prey, and justice had been served by the very women he'd tried to destroy. Some wedding gifts really do keep on giving, and the gift of truth, once unwrapped, can never be taken back. You know, dear, that's why I always say you should never underestimate an old grandmother who's been backed into a corner. We might be small, but we're fierce when it comes to protecting the ones we love, and sometimes, just sometimes, we know exactly how to make the bad ones pay for what they've done.